People said Adrian Romano stopped touching women 3 years ago after the night that broke him. But in New York, people only whispered his name when they were sure the windows were closed. Rain hammered against the black windows of the Romano Tower penthouse while Manhattan glittered below like a city built from diamonds and bad decisions. I adjusted the silver tray in my hands for what felt like the 100th time that night, trying not to think about how my feet ached inside shoes that cost half my paycheck. The charity gala on the 42nd floor of the Beaumont Hotel was the kind of event where women wore dresses worth more than my Honda Civic and men shook hands over deals that could change entire neighborhoods overnight. I didn't belong there. Everyone knew it except me. Table 7 needs another bottle of champagne, my manager hissed as he rushed past me with panic already sweating through his collar. And stay away from the Romano section unless they ask for you directly. Romano. Even hearing the name made the room feel colder. I'd lived in New York long enough to know who Adrian Romano was. Everyone did. Newspapers called him a billionaire investor. The city called him untouchable. The internet called him a myth wrapped in Armani suits and silence. But the waitresses backstage called him something else entirely. Dangerous. Has he shown up yet? Another server whispered beside me while pretending to polish glasses. I heard he had a model removed from one of his clubs just because she touched his arm. I heard he hasn't dated anyone in years. I heard worse. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as thunder rolled outside. Then the room changed. It wasn't loud. Nobody announced him. But conversations slowed anyway. Heads turned. The kind of silence that only follows power spread through the ballroom in invisible waves. Adrian Romano had arrived. I looked before I could stop myself. Tall, dark suit perfectly tailored. Black hair swept back from a face so calm it almost looked carved from stone. He walked beside 2 men in matching charcoal suits, but somehow they disappeared next to him. His presence swallowed the room whole. Women stared too. Long. Men straightened their posture when he passed. Even from across the ballroom, I understood immediately why people feared him. It wasn't anger. It was control. The terrifying kind. My fingers tightened around the tray. Elena! My manager snapped under his breath. Eyes down. Right. Eyes down. I turned too quickly. The heel of my shoe caught against the marble floor and the tray slipped from my hands before I could save it. Crystal exploded across the ballroom. Champagne splashed over polished shoes and designer gowns. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Every head turned toward me. Heat rushed into my face so fast I thought I might faint. I'm so sorry, I whispered, already kneeling to gather broken glass with shaking hands. I'm so sorry. Nobody moved to help. Somewhere behind me, I heard my manager mutter something that sounded dangerously close to a prayer. Then the ballroom fell completely silent. Not normal silence. Fear silence. I felt it before I saw him. The air changed. Slowly, I looked up. Adrian Romano stood 10 feet away staring directly at me. Ice blue eyes. Calm expression. One hand resting loosely in his pocket while rainwater still darkened the shoulders of his coat. He didn't look angry. Somehow that felt worse. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs as he stepped closer across the shattered glass. One step, then another. The entire room watched like nobody remembered how to breathe. His gaze dropped briefly to the small cut on my hand where Crystal had sliced my skin. A single drop of blood slid across my palm. Then his eyes lifted back to mine. Cold, sharp, curious, like he'd just found something unexpected. One of the men beside him leaned down slightly. Sir. Adrian never looked away from me. Bring her to me. The man beside Adrian Romano moved toward me first. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He extended one hand calmly like this happened every day in their world. Miss, he said quietly, please come with us. Around me, the ballroom had returned to life in nervous fragments. Soft music drifted through crystal chandeliers again. Wealthy guests resumed. Conversations they clearly did not want interrupted. Nobody looked directly at me anymore. That somehow felt worse. My manager appeared beside me so fast I almost jumped. His face had gone pale beneath the gold ballroom lights. Elena, he whispered harshly while forcing a smile for nearby guests. Go with them. What? Just go. His eyes flicked nervously toward Adrian before lowering immediately. Please. Please. Not help me. Not are you okay? Just please. I stared at the blood slowly sliding across my palm from the broken glass. I can clean this up first. Someone else will handle it. The man in the suit still waited patiently beside me, but patience like his did not feel optional. I stood carefully, smoothing my black uniform with trembling fingers. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea. The kind of bad idea women later describe while staring into police cameras on the evening news. But another instinct rose louder than fear. Pride. I had spent 26 years surviving men who thought money gave them ownership over everything around them. I was too exhausted to start shaking now. Adrian watched me approach without moving. Up close, he looked even more unreal. Not handsome in the soft Hollywood way. Sharper than that. Controlled. Like every expression had been carefully locked away years ago. His ice blue eyes settled briefly on the cut across my hand again. You are bleeding, he said finally. His voice was lower than I expected. Calm enough to silence the noise inside my head for one dangerous second. I glanced at my hand. It is just a scratch. You dropped an entire tray of crystal. That part is less ideal. One corner of the man beside him almost smiled before quickly looking away. Adrian did not react at all. He simply studied me with the unsettling focus of someone unused to hearing honest answers. What is your name? Elena Carter. How long have you worked here, Elena Carter? 3 months. You are not very good at it. Heat rushed into my cheeks. I was doing fine until your entire security team started staring at me like I was carrying a bomb. Silence. Then unexpectedly, the faintest shift crossed Adrian's expression. Not amusement exactly. Something close to it. The ballroom lights reflected against the silver watch at his wrist as he stepped closer. Not enough to invade my space. Just enough for me to catch the scent of cedarwood and rain lingering on his coat. Most people are nervous around me, he said quietly. Maybe most people should try therapy. The bodyguard beside him coughed suddenly into his hand like he was hiding a laugh. My stomach dropped the second the words escaped my mouth. Great. Fantastic. I had just insulted the most powerful man in Manhattan while bleeding on imported marble floors. I waited for anger, for humiliation, for security dragging me out through the service exit. Instead, Adrian stared at me for 3 long seconds that made the entire ballroom disappear around us. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a white linen handkerchief. Expensive. Immaculate. He offered it toward my injured hand. You are bleeding on the Beaumont marble, he said calmly. They become very dramatic about stains. I accepted the cloth carefully, trying not to touch his fingers. The fabric felt absurdly soft against my skin. Thank you. You are welcome. Another beat of silence settled between us while thunder rolled outside the towering windows behind him. Then Adrian looked toward the man beside him without taking his eyes off me. Cancel my midnight meeting. The bodyguard blinked once in surprise. Sir, I changed my mind. His gaze remained locked on mine. Cold, curious, intent. I would like to know why the only woman in this city, who is not afraid of me, works 16-hour shifts carrying champagne for people she clearly hates. People always imagine powerful men speak loudly, but Adrian Romano never raised his voice once that night, and somehow the entire ballroom still revolved around him like planets trapped in orbit. I tightened my grip around the white handkerchief in my hand while trying to process what he had just said. Around us, wealthy strangers pretended not to stare while secretly listening to every word. The string quartet continued playing near the stage, but softer now, swallowed beneath the steady rhythm of rain hitting the windows 40 stories above Manhattan. That is a strange question to ask a waitress, I said carefully. Adrian slipped one hand into his pocket again. Calm, controlled, like nothing in the world could rush him. You did not answer it. Maybe I do not enjoy discussing my financial situation with strangers. Most strangers do not know your full name after 30 seconds. That is because most strangers do not order people around like medieval kings. Another pause. Another unreadable look in those cold blue eyes. His bodyguard beside him glanced toward the floor like he suddenly found marble fascinating. Adrian stepped toward the private section near the ballroom windows and motioned once for me to follow. Walk with me. Is that a request? Does it matter? I should have said no. Every survival instinct in my body screamed that men like Adrian Romano did not exist in the same world as women like me without consequences attached. But refusing him in the middle of a crowded ballroom full of billionaires and politicians suddenly felt impossible. So I followed him across the polished floor while whispers moved behind us like smoke. The private section overlooked the city skyline. Rain blurred the lights below into streaks of gold and white across the glass. Adrian stopped beside the window with his back partly toward the ballroom. For the first time all evening, he looked almost tired. Not physically. Something deeper than that. You are angry, he said quietly. I blinked. Excuse me? Most people around me are nervous. You are angry. Maybe because I dropped $600 worth of crystal in front of 300 rich people. That is not the reason. His eyes shifted toward me again. Sharp enough to make lying feel pointless. I exhaled slowly. Fine. I am angry because people like this. I gestured toward the ballroom. Spend $10,000 on flowers for one night while half the city works 2 jobs to survive. And yet you are here serving them. Exactly. Something unreadable crossed his face again. Interest maybe. Or recognition. How many jobs do you work, Elena Carter? 3. Why? I laughed softly before I could stop myself. That is usually how rent works in Manhattan. You avoid direct answers often. Only when rich men interrogate me beside million-dollar windows. For one dangerous second, his mouth almost curved into a smile again. Tiny, brief, gone immediately, but I saw it. And somehow that unsettled me more than his silence had. Adrian Romano was not supposed to smile. Men whispered about him like storms or wars. Smiling did not fit the mythology. You are different from what I expected, I admitted quietly. Is that disappointment? I have not decided yet. Thunder rolled outside again, deeper this time. Adrian looked out across the city below us. Endless towers, endless lights, a kingdom made of steel and money. 3 years ago, he said calmly, a woman attempted to use my name to climb into rooms she did not belong in. The shift in conversation caught me off guard. Okay. Since then, women usually want something from me before they even speak. His gaze returned to mine slowly. You seem to want me to leave you alone. That is because I enjoy peaceful evenings where nobody whispers about organized crime near the shrimp cocktails. Another silence stretched between us. Heavy. Strange. Then suddenly one of the security men near the ballroom entrance pressed his hand against an earpiece and walked quickly toward Adrian. Sir, he said low enough that most people would not hear. There is an issue downstairs. Adrian never looked away from me. Handle it. It involves Miss Carter. My stomach tightened instantly. What does that mean? The guard hesitated. There is a man outside asking for her by name. Adrian's expression changed so subtly most people would miss it completely. But I saw it. The temperature around him dropped 10 degrees in one heartbeat. Describe him, Adrian said quietly. Mid-30s. Aggressive. Says she owes him money. Fear slid cold and immediate through my chest because I already knew exactly who it was before the guard finished speaking. And when Adrian noticed the fear on my face for the first time that night, something dangerous woke up behind his eyes. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor beneath the Beaumont Hotel had disappeared completely. Rain streaked down the towering windows behind Adrian, while the music from the ballroom faded into distant static inside my head. There was only one man reckless enough to come looking for me at a gala filled with New York millionaires. Only one man angry enough to turn embarrassment into a public performance. I need to leave, I said immediately. Adrian did not move. Who is he? Nobody. His blue eyes sharpened slightly. That is not the expression people make over nobody. The security guard waited silently beside us while tension pressed heavier into the private lounge. I folded the blood-stained handkerchief tighter around my palm. His name is Ryan. Even saying it exhausted me. We dated for a few months. He borrowed money. I asked for it back. Apparently that injured his ego. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. And now he is outside demanding repayment from a waitress during a private charity gala. Congratulations. You understand basic male behavior in Manhattan. The bodyguard beside him looked away again, like hiding amusement had become physically painful tonight. Adrian ignored him completely. Is he dangerous? No, I answered too fast. Adrian noticed immediately. Of course he did. Men like him probably built entire empires from noticing hesitation in other people's voices. Elena. My name sounded different when he said it. Lower. Controlled. Like a warning wrapped in velvet. I exhaled slowly. He just does not like hearing the word no. Adrian studied me for one long second before turning toward the guard. Nobody enters this floor without my permission. Understood, sir. The guard disappeared immediately into the ballroom crowd. That is unnecessary, I said quickly. I can handle Ryan myself. Adrian looked genuinely unimpressed by that statement. You are shaking. I glanced down. My fingers were trembling against the white cloth wrapped around my hand. Great. Apparently my body had decided to betray me publicly tonight too. I am tired, I muttered. You are afraid. I am annoyed. You confuse those emotions often? The irritation that flashed through me finally pushed past the fear. You know what? Not every problem requires a billionaire bodyguard intervention. Adrian stepped closer. Not threatening. Somehow worse. Calm men always felt more dangerous than loud ones. And yet your first instinct was to leave the moment his name appeared. His voice stayed soft. That tells me everything I need to know. Thunder shook the windows again. The ballroom lights flickered briefly before stabilizing. Across the room, wealthy strangers continued laughing beneath chandeliers, while my entire nervous system tried not to collapse beside the most intimidating man in New York. I hated how aware I suddenly was of Adrian standing near me. The quiet confidence. The impossible stillness. The way everyone around him moved carefully, like orbiting something powerful enough to destroy them if approached incorrectly. I do not need rescuing, I said finally. Adrian tilted his head slightly. That sentence usually means the opposite. Before I could answer, another security man approached quickly from the ballroom entrance. Sir, he said low enough for only us to hear. The individual downstairs became aggressive with hotel staff. Heat crawled up my neck immediately. Oh my God. He also claims Miss Carter promised him money tonight. Adrian's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Did he touch anyone? No, sir. Security contained the situation. Adrian nodded once. Good. Then his eyes returned to me. Cold blue. Completely focused. You are leaving with my driver tonight. I stared at him. Excuse me? You heard me. Absolutely not. That was not a request. Anger sparked hot and immediate through my chest. There it was. The control everyone whispered about. The reason powerful men always eventually disappointed me. You do not get to decide where I go. Adrian's gaze never wavered. And you do not get to walk alone into a storm when someone downstairs is clearly waiting for you. You cannot buy authority over people because you own expensive suits. Interesting. His voice stayed perfectly calm. Because you seem perfectly willing to let a man who frightens you dictate your movements instead. The words hit harder than I expected because part of me knew he was right. I hated that he was right. Adrian stepped closer one final time until I could see raindrops melting slowly against the dark fabric of his coat. You said earlier that I should try therapy. His eyes locked onto mine. Perhaps you should try accepting protection when it is offered. Then, for the first time that night, Adrian Romano reached toward me slowly enough that I could step away if I wanted. His fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the white cloth wrapped around my injured hand. Careful, gentle, like even he understood something fragile existed between us now. "Come upstairs with me, Elena," he said quietly, "before the city downstairs remembers who I am." The private elevator opened with barely a sound, but stepping inside beside Adrian Romano felt like crossing into another version of New York entirely. Warmer, quieter, more dangerous. The doors slid shut behind us while the ballroom disappeared beneath layers of polished steel and silence. Rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling above the elevator as Manhattan lights drifted farther below us floor by floor. I folded my arms tightly across my chest, suddenly hyper-aware that I was alone with a man people feared enough to lower their voices when saying his name. Adrian stood beside me with one hand in his coat pocket, perfectly still except for the faint rise and fall of his breathing. His security team had remained downstairs. Somehow that unsettled me more. "You always kidnap waitresses after charity events?" I asked finally. "Only the sarcastic ones." I glanced toward him despite myself. That almost sounded like a joke. "Do not spread rumors. I have a reputation." The corner of my mouth twitched before I could stop it. Adrian noticed immediately. Of course he did. Nothing seemed to escape him. The elevator doors opened directly into a penthouse so large my tiny apartment could probably fit inside the living room twice. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, revealing rain-soaked Manhattan beneath us in glittering rivers of gold and white. Everything smelled faintly of cedarwood, expensive coffee, and clean linen. Soft jazz drifted quietly from hidden speakers somewhere. Overhead, it did not look like the home of a monster. That was the problem. Monsters were easier when they looked like monsters. Adrian removed his coat slowly and draped it across the back of a leather chair near the windows. "Sit. Still not great with requests, huh? I prefer efficiency. That is one word for it." He disappeared briefly into another room while I remained standing beside the enormous windows, staring down at traffic moving through the rain far below. The city looked smaller from up here, fragile somehow. A few seconds later Adrian returned carrying a black medical kit. I blinked in surprise. "You have a first aid kit? I enjoy being prepared. You also own a building with 12 bathrooms. Forgive me for underestimating your practicality." Adrian set the kit on the marble counter nearby and gestured toward one of the chairs. "Sit down, Elena." His tone softened slightly this time, barely noticeable, still enough that I obeyed before realizing it. Adrian crouched in front of me with calm precision, opening the medical kit while thunder rolled outside the towering windows behind him. The image felt so surreal I almost laughed from exhaustion. The most feared man in Manhattan kneeling beside a waitress because of a small cut on her hand. "This is unnecessary," I murmured. "You are still bleeding through the cloth. You notice everything, do not you?" "Usually." He removed the blood-stained handkerchief carefully from my palm. His fingers barely touched my skin. Deliberate, controlled, like he was more aware of the contact than I was. The cut itself looked small beneath the bright penthouse lights, but glass had sliced deeper than I realized. Adrian cleaned it silently with steady hands while I watched the storm outside instead of watching him. Somehow that felt safer. "How old are you?" he asked quietly. 26. "And you already look exhausted." I laughed softly. "That is because I am. 3 jobs. Welcome to America." Adrian wrapped a clean bandage carefully around my palm. His movements remained impossibly gentle for someone with hands built like they belonged on marble statues outside government buildings. "What are the jobs?" "Waitressing, bookkeeping for a construction company in Queens, and coffee shop mornings on weekends." "How many hours do you sleep?" "That depends. Are we counting emotional breakdowns as naps?" For the first time all night, Adrian actually smiled. Small, brief, but real enough to completely change his face. It startled me more than his coldness ever had. Men like him were not supposed to look human suddenly. His gaze lifted toward mine while his fingers still lightly held my injured hand. "You use humor the same way other people use armor." My heartbeat stumbled once for reasons I refused to examine. "You analyze people often?" "Only the interesting ones." Silence settled between us again. heavy but no longer uncomfortable. Rain streaked across the towering windows while jazz hummed quietly through the penthouse. Adrian released my hand slowly, but his eyes stayed on me, focused, curious, like he still could not understand why I was different from every woman who had crossed his path in the last 3 years. Then his phone buzzed once on the marble counter nearby. Adrian glanced at the screen. Something dark shifted behind his expression instantly. The warmth vanished. "What?" I asked carefully. Adrian locked the phone screen without answering. "Your friend downstairs," he said quietly. "Apparently he just informed hotel security that if he cannot see you tonight, he plans to wait outside your apartment instead." The warmth inside Adrian Romano's penthouse disappeared the second those words left his mouth. "Wait outside your apartment instead." My chest tightened instantly because I knew Ryan well enough to understand that was not an empty threat. Rain slid down the massive windows behind us while Manhattan glittered beneath the storm like a city pretending it was still awake. I pushed myself up from the chair too quickly. "I should go." Adrian remained standing near the marble counter, one hand resting beside the silent phone. "No, Ryan is annoying, not dangerous." Adrian looked at me steadily. "You keep repeating that while looking terrified." I hated how accurately he read me. "You do not understand." "Then explain it to me." His voice stayed calm, controlled, but something sharper existed underneath now. Protective, maybe. The realization unsettled me more than it should have. I crossed my arms tightly across my chest and turned toward the rain-covered windows instead of toward him. "Ryan was fine at first," I admitted quietly. "Funny, charming. The kind of man who remembers birthdays and tips waiters too much during the first month." Adrian said nothing. He just listened with the same focused stillness that made every word feel heavier. "Then he lost his job 6 months ago." I swallowed hard. After that, everything became my fault somehow. His stress, his debt, his drinking. Every conversation turned into an argument if I tried saying no to anything. Thunder rolled above the city again. "Did he hurt you?" Adrian asked softly. The question landed harder than I expected because nobody had asked it before. Not directly, not carefully. I stared down at the white bandage wrapped around my palm. "Not exactly." Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. "That is not an answer." He punched walls, doors. Once he threw my coffee maker out the apartment window because I worked a double shift instead of answering his calls. My laugh came out thinner than I intended. Apparently caffeine was responsible for ruining our relationship. Adrian's eyes darkened in a way that instantly changed the air around him. Not explosive anger. Worse, cold anger. Precise anger. "And you stayed. Because life is expensive." I shrugged weakly. "Because when someone apologizes enough times, eventually you start wanting to believe them." Silence stretched between us. Heavy. Honest. Somewhere below us, the city continued moving through rain and traffic and neon lights while I stood barefoot emotionally in front of the one man I should probably trust least. Adrian walked slowly toward the windows beside me. His reflection appeared in the glass first before I felt his presence beside me. Tall, controlled, dangerous in the way storms are dangerous before lightning ever appears. 3 years ago, he said quietly, someone I cared about made the mistake of believing apologies instead of patterns. I turned slightly toward him. Adrian kept his gaze on the skyline below us. She thought love could eventually outweigh betrayal if she stayed patient long enough. His voice stayed calm, but something painful moved beneath every word now. It did not. What happened? Adrian was silent for several seconds, long enough that I thought he might ignore the question completely. Then finally he answered without looking at me. She disappeared. Rain tapped softly against the windows around us. And after that? I asked carefully. Adrian's expression hardened again almost instantly, walls sliding back into place. After that, I stopped confusing attachment with weakness. The answer should have sounded cold. Instead, it sounded lonely. I hated that I noticed the difference. My phone suddenly buzzed inside my purse on the marble counter nearby. Ryan's name flashed across the screen again, and again beneath missed calls already stacked from earlier tonight. Adrian glanced toward the phone once. Do not answer it. I should tell him to leave. No, you cannot control every situation, Adrian. His eyes shifted toward mine slowly. Watch me. Heat rose into my face before I could stop it. Maybe from irritation. Maybe from something far more dangerous. Adrian stepped closer then. Not enough to trap me. Just enough that I became painfully aware of how quiet the penthouse suddenly felt around us. You are staying here tonight, he said calmly. Absolutely not. Your apartment address is already compromised. You sound like a government agency. I sound like a man trying to prevent a problem before it escalates. I shook my head immediately. I barely know you. Adrian looked down at me with that same unreadable focus that always made my pulse lose rhythm. And yet, he said softly, you are less afraid of me than the man currently waiting outside your building. The terrifying part was that he was right again. The guest bedroom alone was larger than my entire apartment in Queens, and somehow that only made sleep feel more impossible. Rain continued sliding down the massive penthouse windows while distant thunder rolled across Manhattan sometime after 2 in the morning. I sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed wearing an oversized black t-shirt one of Adrian's house staff had quietly delivered an hour earlier. The shirt smelled faintly like cedarwood and expensive detergent. Everything inside this place smelled expensive. Even the silence. My phone sat charging on the nightstand beside me with 23 missed calls from Ryan and 4 texts ranging from apologetic to unhinged in under 30 minutes. I had stopped reading after the third one. Across the hall, somewhere deeper inside the penthouse, I could hear low voices occasionally drifting through the quiet. Adrian was still awake. That fact should not have mattered. For some reason it did. I stood and crossed toward the enormous windows overlooking the city below. New York looked different from up here. Smaller, less personal. Like all the chaos and heartbreak and unpaid bills belonged to someone else entirely. My reflection stared back at me faintly against the storm-dark glass. Messy hair. Tired eyes. One waitress standing inside the home of a man newspapers described like a modern king built from money and fear. The entire situation felt absurd enough to laugh about later if I survived it emotionally. A soft knock sounded against the partially open bedroom door behind me. I turned too quickly. Adrian stood there wearing dark slacks and a black button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled once at the forearms. No jacket. No tie. Somehow he looked more intimidating without the armor of expensive suits and ballroom lights. More real. You are still awake, he observed quietly. So are you. Adrian stepped inside slowly, one hand resting in his pocket again. My staff informed me you have not touched the tea they brought. Your staff terrifies me. They are harmless. I raised an eyebrow. That sentence sounds significantly less comforting coming from you. Another flicker of that almost smile crossed his face before disappearing again. Adrian glanced toward the glowing phone on the nightstand. He is still contacting you. Apparently rejection builds character. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. Block the number. I will. I hesitated. Eventually. Elena. Fine. You sound exactly like my therapist. You have a therapist? Not anymore. Manhattan prices are criminal. Adrian leaned one shoulder lightly against the doorway while watching me with that same unnerving focus that made lying feel impossible. You joke whenever conversations become uncomfortable. And you stare at people like you are reading classified documents. Silence settled softly between us. Not awkward anymore. Somehow worse. Comfortable silence felt dangerous around a man like Adrian Romano. I crossed my arms loosely against the oversized shirt. Do you ever sleep? I asked. Adrian looked briefly toward the rain-covered skyline outside the windows before answering. Not well. Nightmares? His eyes shifted back toward mine immediately. Too direct. Too sharp. I realized then that almost nobody probably asked him personal questions. They were too busy fearing him. Something like that, he said quietly. I should have stopped there. Instead, I asked the question anyway. What happened to her? Adrian went still. Completely still. The kind of stillness that changes the temperature in a room. The woman from 3 years ago. His jaw tightened once before relaxing again. She trusted the wrong people. And you blame yourself. It was not a question. Adrian looked at me for a long moment beneath the low golden lights of the guest room. You notice too much. Occupational hazard. People talk differently when they think waitresses are invisible. Something unreadable crossed his expression then. Not anger. Something heavier. She died because she stayed near me, he said quietly. The room seemed to lose oxygen for one terrible second. Adrian. That is why people close to me do not usually stay close for long. His voice remained calm, but the loneliness beneath it nearly broke my heart before I could stop it. Rain tapped softly against the windows around us while Manhattan glowed below like another universe entirely. I looked at him standing there in the doorway. The most powerful man I had ever met. The most isolated too. You know, I said softly, for someone supposedly terrifying, you spend an awful lot of time making sure people are safe. Adrian's gaze locked onto mine instantly. Intense enough to steal the next breath directly from my lungs. Then slowly, almost carefully, he stepped farther into the room. That is because, he said quietly, the world becomes very ugly when I stop trying. My heartbeat stumbled once again. And for the first time that night, I realized the dangerous thing about Adrian Romano was not that he frightened me. It was that part of me already felt safer when he was near. Morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse in pale gold streaks that made everything look softer than it really was. For one disorienting second, I forgot where I was. Then the view hit me. Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond the towering windows beside the guest bedroom, wrapped in silver rain clouds and early traffic. Adrian Romano's world. My body still felt heavy with exhaustion, but for the first time in months I had slept through the night without checking my phone every hour. That realization alone terrified me a little. I pushed myself upright slowly, the oversized black shirt slipping off one shoulder while the city hummed quietly below. My phone rested untouched on the nightstand beside me. No missed calls. No frantic messages. Nothing, which somehow felt more unsettling than Ryan's constant harassment. A soft knock sounded at the partially open door before a woman in her 50s stepped inside carrying a tray with coffee and breakfast. Elegant gray uniform. Warm eyes. Good morning, Miss Carter, she said kindly. Mr. Romano asked me to bring this up. I blinked. He did not need to do that. Her expression softened slightly like she had heard that sentence before from other confused women standing inside this penthouse. Mr. Romano rarely asks twice once he decides someone matters. Before I could process that statement, she quietly placed the tray near the windows and disappeared again. Matters. The word lingered in my chest far longer than it should have. 20 minutes later, after borrowing clothes that somehow fit perfectly despite allegedly coming from a nearby store, I stepped cautiously into the main penthouse living area. Adrian stood near the kitchen island speaking quietly into his phone while morning light poured across the marble floors around him. Dark slacks, black sweater, coffee cup in one hand. He looked less like a feared empire builder this morning and more like a man who had forgotten how to sleep properly years ago. No, he said calmly into the phone. I do not care how much he apologizes. I care whether he understands boundaries. A pause. Adrian glanced toward me the second I entered the room. Good. Then the situation is resolved. He ended the call immediately. Good morning, he said. I crossed my arms lightly. Your staff scares me less than you do, which feels medically concerning. Adrian set his coffee cup down slowly. You slept. Apparently your penthouse has magical anti-anxiety air conditioning. It is the windows. Ah yes, trauma but make it luxury. Another brief flicker of amusement crossed his face before fading again. I noticed then that the security tension from last night seemed gone. Softer somehow. What happened with Ryan? I asked carefully. Adrian held my gaze for one long second. He will not contact you again. That sounds suspiciously vague. I spoke with him. My stomach tightened instantly. Adrian. Relax, Elena. His voice stayed calm. Nobody threatened him. Then why do I suddenly feel like you are leaving out 12 terrifying details? Adrian walked toward the windows overlooking Central Park below. Because people often assume the worst about me. Do they usually have reasons? Sometimes. I stared at him standing there against the skyline. Calm, elegant, untouchable, and somehow still the loneliest person I had ever met. You really did not have to involve yourself in my problems, I said quietly. Adrian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. I know. The honesty in that answer caught me completely off guard. Then why did you? Silence stretched between us while sunlight glowed against the glass around him. Adrian looked down briefly at the coffee cup in his hand before answering. Because last night when everyone else in that ballroom looked at me with fear. His blue eyes lifted slowly toward mine. You looked at me like I was human. Something fragile moved painfully through my chest at those words. I did not know what to say to that. Maybe because part of me understood exactly what loneliness sounded like when someone finally admitted it aloud. Adrian stepped closer then, slow enough not to startle me. You should stay here for a few days, he said quietly, until things settle down. Adrian, before you refuse automatically, consider something. His gaze held mine steadily. You slept peacefully for the first time in months last night. The terrifying part was that he was right again. I hated how often that happened around him. Somewhere below us, the city moved endlessly through noise and rain and ambition. But inside that penthouse, beneath the quiet morning light and the impossible stillness surrounding Adrian Romano, I realized something dangerous had already begun. I was starting to trust the one man everyone else in New York feared. 3 weeks later, I was standing beside Adrian Romano on the rooftop terrace of his penthouse, while Manhattan glowed beneath us like a living constellation. And somehow my entire life had quietly rearranged itself around him without me noticing when it happened. The city air carried the faint scent of rain again, warm this time instead of cold. Music drifted softly from somewhere inside the penthouse behind us while helicopters blinked red across the skyline in the distance. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup Adrian's chef insisted on bringing me every evening at exactly 8 o'clock. Apparently everyone inside this building had accepted my existence before I had. You are thinking too loudly again, Adrian said calmly from beside the railing. I glanced toward him. Dark charcoal sweater. Sleeves pushed slightly above his wrists. One hand resting inside his pocket while the other held a glass of bourbon he had barely touched. He looked less untouchable now than he had the night we met. Still powerful. Still dangerous. But human in ways nobody else ever seemed allowed to see. I was thinking your staff might actually like me more than they like you, I admitted. Impossible. I pay them. Maria hugged me this morning. Adrian looked genuinely betrayed. She has worked for me 8 years and has never hugged me. I laughed. Before I could stop myself. The sound surprised both of us slightly. Adrian's eyes settled on me immediately after. Quieter now. Softer. That look still did strange things to my heartbeat. What? I asked carefully. Nothing. That is a lie. You laugh more now. The honesty in his voice stole my next response completely. Silence stretched between us while traffic moved endlessly far below the rooftop terrace. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since one shattered tray of champagne glasses changed everything. Ryan had disappeared from my life entirely after that first night. No more calls. No more messages. No more fear walking home after late shifts. Adrian never explained exactly what conversation took place between them downstairs at the Beaumont Hotel. Part of me suspected I did not want details. Another part understood something important anyway. Adrian Romano protected the people he cared about with terrifying efficiency. The realization should have frightened me more than it did. You know, I said quietly, stepping closer beside him near the railing. Normal people usually buy flowers when they like someone. Adrian's mouth twitched faintly. I purchased a security team instead. More practical. That is the least romantic sentence anyone has ever spoken to me. And yet you are still here. He was right again. God, I hated that. Wind brushed softly through my hair while the city lights reflected in Adrian's pale blue eyes. The rooftop suddenly felt too quiet, too close. "Can I ask you something?" I said carefully. Adrian nodded once. "The night we met." I looked down at the coffee cup warming my hands. "Why me?" Adrian was silent for several seconds, long enough that I almost regretted asking. Then finally he answered in that same calm voice that somehow always sounded more honest after midnight. "Because you looked at me like I was a man instead of a legend." My chest tightened painfully. Adrian stepped closer then. Slow, careful. Like even now he still expected me to disappear eventually. "Most people see money first," he admitted quietly. "Or fear. Or power." His eyes locked onto mine beneath the rooftop lights. "You saw exhaustion." The terrifying part was that he was right. I had seen it from the beginning. The loneliness hidden beneath the control. The grief underneath the reputation. The man buried beneath the empire. Adrian looked away briefly toward the skyline before speaking again. 3 years ago, I stopped allowing people close to me because I believed distance kept them safe. His jaw tightened once. "Then you walked into a ballroom covered in broken glass arguing with me about therapy." I laughed softly despite the emotion suddenly burning behind my eyes. Adrian's gaze returned to mine slowly, intense enough to still my heartbeat completely. "And now," I whispered. The city wind moved gently around us while Manhattan glittered endlessly below. Adrian set his untouched bourbon glass aside on the stone railing beside him. Then, for the first time since I met him, he reached toward me without hesitation. His fingers brushed carefully against my cheek. Warm, steady, real. "Now," he said quietly, "I think some people are worth the risk." Emotion rose painfully into my throat before I could stop it. I covered his hand lightly with mine, holding it there against my face, while the entire city stretched beneath us like another universe entirely. Adrian Romano had spent years convincing the world he could not feel anything anymore. But standing there beneath the Manhattan skyline, with his hand trembling almost invisibly against my skin, I realized the truth was much simpler than that. The most dangerous men are not the ones who stop feeling. They are the ones who finally find one person capable of making them feel again.